Good morning, everybody. This is Arun Wadvani from Ingram Micro Cloud. I hope you're looking forward to our session today. Today, we're going to go through an update on Cloud Elevate and specifically around Microsoft Azure or Azure, sometimes it's referred to. So, but just before we kick off, I'm just going to do a quick sound check to make sure everybody can hear us okay. If I could just get somebody just to acknowledge in the chat box that you can hear us clearly. And once we have that confirmation, we'll be able to kick off. Audio is fine, fantastic. Thank you for confirming that to us. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Rob Crane, who's a Microsoft MVP, obviously who has an in-depth knowledge around this particular area. Many of you would have previously heard Rob talking about this area of expertise, and obviously I'm looking forward to hearing that. Next slide. Cool, so just very quickly an agenda. So introduction, that was what I just did there for the moment. We're going to go through some Azure scenarios for SMBs. Rob's going to take us through the Azure Pricing Calculator, and then we're going to have a Q&A session towards the end of that session. And once we've run that, I've actually asked Gaurav Tandon, who's also in the room with me, just to help facilitate that Q&A session. So as you have questions that come up based on what Rob shares with you this morning, feel free to put those in the chat box and we'll deal with each of those questions as they come through. After we've done the Q&A session, then I'll just give you a quick introduction to the Ingram Micro's Azure Accelerate program. I'll quickly get across anything around our promotions and any key events that we're running. So Rob, over to you. Are you there? Can you hear us?
Yep, I can hear you. So let's kick off and get into understanding a little bit about what Azure is. So one of the biggest challenges out there these days, I think, is around how you can easily define Azure for yourself and also for your customers. So the definition that I like to use, the one-line definition that I like to use, basically is Azure is your on-demand data center. Now, there's a couple of important terms here to appreciate that roll in well with what Azure is and what it does. The first one is on-demand. So what that means is that most services in Azure are billed on consumption. So that means you only pay for the time that those services are in use or they are running. So a typical example of this is a virtual machine. If you run a virtual machine 24/7 for a whole month, you're charged for the whole month. However, if you turn that virtual machine off during off-peak times, then you are generally not being charged for the compute time that machine would have. So again, you look at this as, again, you only pay for what you use. Now, this is a different paradigm to Microsoft 365, which is basically a flat fee per user per month based on the license. Now, again, that gives you the flexibility to use Azure in a way that makes sense, but also optimize the costings. The second thing here is the fact that it's your data center. Now that your could be you as a reseller, so you could set up your own Azure environment as your own reseller data center, and then you could sell services out of that to a customer, or the more likely scenario generally is that a customer purchases or you sell a subscription to the customer and that Azure subscription is added under their name, so they have their own data center. So again, we have the flexibility to approach this in two different ways. So again, just to highlight what this is, the reseller, you could go out and buy a commercial Azure tenant from which you could set up VMs and you could sell that to customer one. You could set up storage, so SMB files, blob storage, whatever, and sell that to another customer. Third option is to create backup and also sell that to additional customers. Now, the advantage that this model gives you is the fact that all of the services are within a single tenant. You can manage, maintain, look at the costings of each of these easily. You can break them down using tagging. And the important thing here is it gives you a single monitoring console. It gives you a single Security Console, and again, it can be set up with securities for those inside your business to manage and maintain. And basically, the client is then connected to you because they are buying services out of your data center. Now, the other more common model is for the customer to purchase an Azure subscription through you and for them to add VMs, backup, SQL servers to that environment. And then typically, you would help them configure a site-to-site VPN, which would then link their on-prem environment into the Azure environment. So typically what you would do is you would have a standard on-prem infrastructure environment. You would set up an Azure subscription. You would then set up a site-to-site VPN between those two locations, and that would mean that the resources on-prem are available in Azure, and Azure resources are also available to the on-prem environment. So this makes it easier to do things like migrations. For example, rather than buying new hardware, you could then look at implementing a VM to replace an older machine, and then over time, reduce the dependency you have on any on-prem environment. So again, Azure gives you this flexibility to work with whatever model suits your needs and again works for you. You can certainly use both. There are positives and negatives. There are differences in that sort of model. Generally, the most common model typically is that the customer purchases Azure through you and you manage and maintain that for them, as you've always done with their on-prem equipment. And again, that model on the right-hand side is more common to the model that we've used over time, where the customer would purchase their on-prem equipment and they would then pay you a fee to manage, maintain it, and monitor it. Now, hopefully you've seen something like this to give you a bit of an idea of the overview here of cloud computing. So starting from the left, we're moving from the left to the right here. We're moving from a world where things are on-prem, packaged software and provided infrastructure. In this environment, the customer, along with yourself, is generally responsible for managing, maintaining, patching, updating, doing the whole work here. There's also power consumption that happens, obviously on-prem, plus security and those sort of issues as well. Now, the first step away from that into the cloud, typically when it comes to moving their on-prem environment, is to look at infrastructure as a service, or IaaS. Now, when we talk about IaaS, what happens is Microsoft looks after the virtualization layer, the physical service, physical storage, and the networking. And then basically you set up, manage, and maintain virtual machines on top of that. So you don't have to worry about the hardware or the availability. That is done by Microsoft. And you do, however, have to obviously spin up the VMs. You have to manage, maintain, and patch Windows. You have to manage and maintain and patch the applications, back up the data and whatever. So basically, this is moving the physical infrastructure into a data center, removing the physical components for you to worry about, but everything else, as always, you have to manage, maintain, patch Windows, and so on. The next step to the right takes us to Platform as a Service, or PaaS. This means that Microsoft, again, is managing more of the stack for you. Typically, that means that you only need to look after or worry about the data and any applications that are built on top of that data. So if we had an on-prem SQL server as an example, we would need a Windows server, we would need SQL, we'd need the data and the backup and so forth. If we move that SQL as a virtual machine into IaaS, we basically would purchase a virtual machine from Azure. We would then have a Windows base. We would then put SQL, manage, maintain it, the data, and so on. Platform as a service means that we will be purchasing a service called Azure SQL. That means that Microsoft manages, maintains, load balances, makes available globally the SQL service, and basically you just put your data on top of it. So again, no hardware for you to manage, no patching for you to manage. All that needs to be managed is the hardware, is the application and any custom and the data that goes with that custom application. Now, the most right option here is the one obviously around software as a service. So think of this like Office 365. So again, this is a complete package where Microsoft's managing, maintaining the environment for you, and again, providing you a cost to do all that. So there's nothing really that you need to do when it comes to managing the service. Now, over time, we are moving, as I said, from the left to the right. We're moving to a world of infrastructure as a service to give us the flexibility, to give us the on-demand costing. The next step up is to do platform as a service, where you only pay for the services that you need and not have to worry about the infrastructure or the upgrades underneath. And then the ultimate, obviously, is to look at software as a service. Now, when we have a look at Azure, Azure is a very large environment. It's a big beast to work with. The starting point is that Microsoft has over 54 regions. So these regions are spread around the world. There are 4 data centers in Australia, 2, one in Sydney, one in Melbourne, 2 in Canberra. The 2 in Canberra are focused on government clients. There are regions, obviously, in Singapore, Hong Kong, Europe, all around the world, and Microsoft is continuing to add data centers on a regular clip. So there are some coming to South Africa, the United Arab Emirates, some in Norway. So these data centers are a growing factor. Now, if you come from a traditional infrastructure style background, you should be familiar with this first layer. So the first layer, again, is around things like virtual machines, networking, storage, blob storage, and then things like site-to-site VPNs, DNS, all of that sort of stuff, and identity. So moving your infrastructure into something like Azure, all of that basics, all of that stuff, the TCP/IP, the networking, all of that still remains and still needs to be done by somebody. So again, setting up things securely, monitoring, managing, maintaining, making sure the availability is there. So the skills that you have today will translate directly into the Azure environment, and it removes, again, the need to worry about things like failed disks or RAID controllers, all that sort of thing. That's all done directly by Microsoft. Now, on top of that, we now have the PaaS services, the platform as a service. So you'll now see that these services are much larger in scale. So again, these are services that Microsoft manage and maintain that you consume without having to worry about any of the underlying infrastructure. So on this, we've got our Azure AD, we've got our backups, we've got automation so that we can run regular requirements. We've got websites we can host. We've got things that are growing like analytics and IoT. And also, this is the space that things like machine learning are also moving into. So the advantage of these, again, is the fact that you only pay for what you use. It's not something you have to worry about with the infrastructure underneath. And again, you can have this globally available option here. Now, if you are an infrastructure person, this, again, will give you the opportunity potentially to scale into other services apart from infrastructure. So again, if you want to get into IoT, great opportunity to do that. Machine learning, artificial intelligence, as Microsoft's very keen for people to do, but things like automation. So again, we have the ability to automate regularly running PowerShell scripts across our environment to help us manage, maintain. And in this, we also get things like the analytics. So we can pull information from our on-prem environment, pull it into Azure. We can then report on it, query it, produce nice graphs and output to make it easy for us to view. And again, you'll get a copy of these slides obviously after the event, but that gives you hopefully a bit of an overview of everything that Azure includes. And remember that it's a growing service. Microsoft is adding more regions, they're adding more services, they're adding more abilities to work with these sort of environment. Now, the next most common question that comes about is, okay, how do we license Azure? How do we actually go about selling this to our customers? Well, much like the Office 365 model, there are typically 3 major ways of doing this. So you can do pay as you go, put your credit card in, and it's billed against a credit card, as you can do with something like Office 365. You can also buy it under Open. The way that it works under Open is you generally buy prepaid tokens of $100 or more. You put those into a tenant. Those prepaid tokens are then run down as the consumption increases over the month, very much like a prepaid phone arrangement. Now, that, again, does have its challenges because, again, how much consumption is going to happen in the month, so you need to make sure you have tokens in there. The third and preferred option for resellers who are probably already doing this with Office 365 is the Cloud Solution Provider or CSP program. So again, the idea here is that you will get the ability to push licenses in to a customer's tenant like you do today with Office 365. Then Ingram will send you a bill at the end of the month broken down by customer that shows how much consumption each of the customers have had in Azure. You can then bundle that in with additional services and you can resell that to your customer with a single bill that comes from you. So again, the advantage of the CSP model is it's white labeled. You are basically able to bill the customer directly, and Ingram will give you a consolidated billing for all the customers that you are working with Azure going forward. So again, some options here. If you buy, for example, the direct license, the MOSP, again, it's basically zero upfront cost and it is the most expensive option. It's pay as you go. You can get commitment plans where you do get a discount, but those commitment plans normally start at around $6,000, I think a month as a minimum, not a month, I think it might be annual, for a commitment. So again, you need to commit to that level of spending to get some sort of discount. Your options under open, again, are available. You can buy them as token if you're using an open licensing plan. You can do that. Again, speak to Ingram for the specifics around that. But the advantage with that is that you would typically bill the customer, or the customer would pay for so many tokens in advance. You put them into the tenant, and then as the customer runs those down, if they needed more, they would purchase more from you. The last and preferred option, recommended option, is the CSP option. Again, most resellers hopefully are familiar with that. They're already doing that with Office 365, so it gives them that understanding, same sort of bill, same sort of concept, white labeled, and then the bill comes from you rather than the customer. Now, the next most common thing that people ask about is, okay, what does Azure actually cost? Well, this again is a challenge. It's a new way of looking at things. It's not a flat fee, it's a consumption-based model. So you are charged for what you use. So the traditional way of scoping on-prem hardware is typically to overspec. So this means that if a client comes to you and says, we need a server going forward, most resellers are going to overspec that server because they know the customer is going to need it in theory for 5, but they may push it out to 5, 7 years. So they overspec the server. The client pays more upfront for hopefully something that will do them a longer period of time. The opposite is true with Azure. You really want to underspec something because it's so easy to upgrade. So if you start with a basic virtual machine and that is no longer adequate, you can step up to the next plan quite easily. Basically, you change the size of the VM, reboot the VM, and then it's been effectively upgraded for you. So again, this flexibility means the customer only pays exactly what they need when they need. So again, the way to look at costing is a different sort of paradigm here. So what I'll do here is I'll just give you again an idea of how to do some basic costing. So again, if you go out and do a search or look at the URL that I put up there for the Azure Pricing Calculator, you'll see that you'll see a page that looks very much like this. Now remember, first thing here is that this pricing calculator is publicly available. It's showing you the RRP. Again, buying through CSP, there are discounts and volumes and those sort of things taken care of, but this is an RRP calculator. So if you go through here, you'll see that we've got a list of services on the left-hand side we can select from, and we can then go and price those out. So the one that I'll select here to kick us off is a virtual machine, right? So I basically go in and select the items from Azure I want. And then what it does is it adds it to an estimate area down below. So if I scroll down below, you'll see that I get the estimate here of the virtual machine. I can then obviously go in here and delete that if I don't want that to be the machine. Now, note here that we do need to make some selections. So if we, for example, change the selection of our virtual machine, so rather than having it in West US, we move it into Australia East, so that is in Sydney. What operating system do we want to run, Windows or Linux? So 43% of machines in Azure now are running Linux. Do we want to run not only the OS or BizTalk or SQL? Again, we can have that. License is included in the cost of the VM. What tier do we want to select? Again, we can vary the tier to give us pricing differential, and then we can, again, pick a machine that suits our needs. So in this case, it's selected a D2 V3 with 2 CPUs and 8 gig of RAM and so many disks, and the charge for that is basically almost 22 cents an hour there. All right, so that's basically how we need to look at it. Now, let me just go down here to the bottom and it will give you a total. All right, now, again, you'll notice that the second thing to notice about the calculator is that generally, if you go to it for the first time, it will be in US dollars. So what we need to do is we need to change that to Australian dollars. All right, so that will then update the price for us. So once we've chosen our virtual machine, the next thing to think about in virtual machine terms is something called reserved instances. So again, the default is pay as you go. You're paying at a casual rate, which means you can kill the virtual machine. There's no lock-in contract. If you want to commit, or if you're able to commit to a 1-year contract for this machine, so again, think of like buying a server on-prem for a year, then if you do that, you'll see that the price is decreased by about 21%. If you can commit to a 3-year period, a reserved instance for 3 years, then basically you'll get a 33% discount. So again, if you think of this in terms of on-prem, you buy or you sell a customer server typically for a 3-year period. When they do their hardware refresh, very similar. Now, you'll also ask the question is, okay, what happens if it changes? All right, so again, if you need to change up, if you need to get more power in the server, yes, you can do that. You'll obviously pay the differential for the remaining of the contract. If you want to cancel or change the contract down so that there's less computing commitment, then you can certainly do that. And from memory, again, speak to Ingram, I think there's about a 15% penalty based on the remaining value of the contract. So you're not locked in. There is a penalty to get out of that. But again, if you look at reserved instances, that is a very good way to save a lot of money. A second way to save a lot of money is that if the machine or the environment that you're in does have what they call a hybrid benefit, so typically that's around software assurance, those sort of programs, then you're already paying for a Windows Server license. So again, you can let Microsoft know here by selecting that, and again, that will then take out the cost of the license from that virtual machine. You'll see that drops it quite significantly down to $52. But we'll leave that in because we do need a machine with the version of Windows. All right. And then down the bottom here, we've then got, okay, how do we want to do our disk? So our virtual machine will need a disk. You'll see that we've got the option for SSD and mechanical disks. Again, that's got to do with pricing and performance. So typically, again, a good mix is to have the operating system as a mechanical disk and have your data disks as a high performance SSD for faster access. And again, we can specify the size of the OS. So again, for a 32 gig disk, this is the cost it's going to have. All right, so we can add an additional managed disk on top of this if we want to. A managed disk, again, means that you don't have to manage the storage manually. You're basically offloading that to Microsoft to do. So again, you can see that doing so is only going to cost an additional $3.37 a month. So it's probably a good move to do that because it saves us time and effort. Now, again, as I mentioned, the way Azure works is around consumption. So one of the ideas here, because we're selecting a mechanical disk, it has this concept of transactions, how many transactions, and they're costing a very small amount per unit here. You'll see that a unit is considered 10,000 transactions, and we're allowing here for 100,000 transactions. So again, you can vary that. How do you calculate that? There are some base rules that Microsoft will give you to get that sort of idea. But again, in this case, we'll just stick with the standard, and you'll see that, again, this is basically read and writes to the disk. And that's how, again, how the consumption model is. If I move to a standard SSD, so if I moved away from a standard SSD, again, you'll see the prices does vary, again, depending on the size. All right, so once I've selected that, I'm given a total. You'll see that it also includes support now. So a level of support is also included. There's no additional cost with that. And again, you can also add this licensing program here. Now I've got a bottom line figure here. Now remember that this figure here is based on running 24/7 for a whole month. And again, we can vary that per hours if we want to do that. All right, so now if we want to, we could go in here and say, you know what, we want to add some storage. So we click on the option here, and you'll see down the bottom here that it now adds some storage for us as well. We go through and fill out the appropriate details again, select where we want to do that. So again, Australia Central, and follow through that. All right, and you'll see that we get the ability on the right here to look at the pricing details. We can get some more product details. We can look at the documentation about the storage that we want. So if we go right down the bottom, you'll see here that I can export this calculation or this process here to Excel. So then I can take that and maybe put my services around it or do some more low-level calculations. I can save that. If I want, I can share that with somebody else. All right. So again, the place to start this idea about working out what Azure is going to cost is the Azure Pricing Calculator. Remember, firstly, it's public. Make sure that you change to Australian dollars. And again, that's going to give you an indication. And I'll show you shortly, again, what the pricing calculator actually calculates versus what you actually consume. All right. So let me just swap back to the slides and continue on. Now, probably the most important thing as a partner is the fact that if you are Action Pack or better as a partner, you get internal use rights of Azure. So what that means is typically you will get a number of credits, $140, $200 worth of Azure credits a month that will renew every month. So that means you can use $200 or whatever of Azure services, and then next month you will get another $200. Now, if you want to keep building on that beyond what you're provided, you can add in a credit card or whatever, and again, you get the first $200 or whatever free, and then you're paid, you're billed beyond that. But the important thing is again, most partners have Azure credits, they're not using them. My advice here is don't set up a really powerful virtual machine to do a terminal server environment, and then leave it running and don't use it. That's going to chew through your credits really quickly. There's a smart way to use your credits, and that's typically power up the machine when you use it, shut the machine down when you don't, and that should extend your credits quite easily for the month that's provided. And that's what it's designed for you to test these environments. So again, these links will be available to you after the fact. Again, this is how you go and make sure you have those free credits. This will show you how to activate that. It's all done typically through the Partner Center. And as I mentioned, that will renew on a regular basis. Every month you'll get more credits as part of your partner benefits. And remember that not only are there Azure credits as a partner, there are also potentially things like Office 365 and EMS and Azure AD Premium and so on. So how do we start using Azure, right? So this is the big question, okay? We all know that Azure's out there. How do we start implementing it in a staged manner? So my advice to you is that when you run up a customer that has Office 365, Microsoft 365, you are getting an Azure tenant inside that for free. You are getting Azure AD, which is part of Azure, underneath the covers to do the identity for Office 365 or Microsoft 365. So that means that all you need to do is, if you want to use the paid services of Azure, virtual machines, backup, storage, and so on, you just need to push in a paid Azure subscription. Now, my general advice to people is you should push in an Azure subscription immediately at the same time you do a Microsoft 365 or an Office 365 implementation. Now, the reason that I suggest you do that is, remember that Azure is consumption-based. Therefore, once you've pushed it in, there is no cost for that subscription until you start consuming Azure services. But having it in there means that you have the flexibility immediately to start adding storage, or maybe doing a website for a customer, or giving them a cloud storage location for those large files, or assisting you doing migrations. So one of the things that I use Azure, for example, is when I move files from on-prem to Microsoft 365 and SharePoint Online, I would typically move it to an Azure virtual machine, and again, move from the Azure virtual machine into Office 365. Yes, it's 2 steps, but again, it gives me a staging area, a bit of a backup, and also the connection between an Azure virtual machine and Office 365 is blindingly quick. So again, that's sort of the flexibility that you can use it with. So my advice to you is consider pushing in an Azure subscription into every Office 365, Microsoft 365 tenant that you sell, for the simple reason is it will cost you nothing. It will cost the customer nothing until you start consuming Azure services. It's there, ready to go. Now, let's assume that you have pushed in an Azure subscription into there. What's the first thing that you can implement for your customer? Well, my advice to you would be to consider doing Azure DNS. So Azure DNS is going to allow you to do all the common old DNS records, A, CNAME, MX, TXT, all that sort of stuff. It's going to give you the ability to have name servers spread around the world that are hosted in Azure data centers that are very, very quick, very reliable, and again, zone redundant. You can also basically combine this with the resource manager benefits. Now, one of the big benefits of doing something in Azure in using things like Resource Manager is that you can set up security around that, who's got access to the records, who can view them, who can change them. So maybe you give certain staff the ability to change, other staff have the ability to read, or potentially you could give the customer the ability to read what's in there, do reports, but not basically make any changes. The other side of this is also, thanks to the power of the Microsoft PowerShell, we can now automate this. So for example, I have a script that will basically add a custom domain to Office 365. It will verify that, it will create the records in Azure DNS and then complete the verification. So all I need to do basically is run that script, put in the custom domain, and that will then take care of not only putting the custom domain into Office 365, putting the records into Azure, and doing third-party records, things like DKIM, DMARC, all of that stuff can be done and can be scripted. Now, the benefit of scripting is we can repeat it many times, we have a consistent result, and we can offload that process to somebody else who may not need to know anything about the scripting. So again, one of the big benefits, one of the real advantages I think that Azure has over a lot of other products is the fact that it has built-in scripting abilities with PowerShell, again, which will also link in with things like Office 365 and Microsoft 365, meaning it's much easier to manage that environment. So let's go back and have a talk here about DNS. So this is a real world example. This is the DNS that I have set up in one of my tenants for a real world example to do my commercial domains. So you'll see here that when I went into the pricing calculator, I went into Azure DNS, put it in the Australia East data center. I said that I had one DNS zone, so I'm just basically doing it for my commercial tenants. And I'm expecting no more than 1 million DNS queries a month. Now, remember, the way this works is if this is the root DNS server for my domain, I'm not going to be constantly hit because, again, the idea is if someone needs to go to my domain, they'll go to a local DNS server, which hopefully will serve the record there. If it's not, then it'll move up the chain. So I'm not going to be constantly hit by DNS requests. So, again, 1 million is much more than I think I would ever need for an average domain. Now you'll see that the calculation that I came up with here in Australian dollars was $1.24 per month. So to do Azure DNS for a domain here in with an average usage, you'll see here it also includes support. It cost me by the calculator $1.24. Now, if I actually go in and look at the report, so I pulled this report out for February here, or the last 30 days, basically, you'll see here that in the last 30 days, again, the reality is the cost is only 37 cents. Now, why is that different? The difference is because it's consumption-based. That pricing there is based on 1 million hits, so it is a price per hit times 1 million. Well, I'm not getting anywhere near that. I'm getting 250, 300,000 hits a month. So again, the price on that is significantly cheaper. So remember that the pricing calculator is giving you the high end generally. And again, the actual price you pay will be very different. But again, it works the other way. If the consumption grows for some reason, or you haven't spec'd it correctly, or there's an unexpected growth, then yes, you will be charged for that consumption. That's why we need to understand that there's a different pricing model here. But someone's got to manage that. Someone's got to maintain it. You can put in alerts. You can again, set it up so it sends you emails when it goes over a certain price, and you can drill it down to individual resources. The other example here for you is the fact of a bit of the granularity you can get in reporting. So I went into my costing area. You can see that I viewed it by January, by month, and then I can look at a resource group and so on. So I can keep adding filters. So that's the other big benefit of putting something in your data center. You can, again, get these sort of reporting down to the granularity that you need. So in the SMB scenario, apart from DNS, what's the most likely services to sell? Well, I would suggest to you it's things like data backup, files and folders, disaster recovery, so things like site recovery, deploying VMs, so moving virtual machines from on-prem into Azure, getting them out of the on-prem environment, and potentially hosting websites like WordPress, Joomla, those sort of things. Now, again, it's easy to sell the server backup. There's a range of options when it comes to backup in Azure that we unfortunately won't have time to go into here, but you can back up file servers, you can back up workstations, you can back up services like SQL, Exchange on-prem, AD on-prem, and so on. You can set the retention periods up to, you know, over 100 years. The backups are encrypted in transit. They're encrypted in storage within your Azure environment. You can set up additional securities to determine who can actually access that on a regular basis. And remember, there are no hardware or media costs there. Now, one of the important things with Azure is that there is a data transit charge normally for information coming out of Azure. It's always free going into Azure, so any data going into Azure is always free. But data coming out of Azure can incur transfer cost. That is the case except for backup. So every single transfer in or out of a backup location in Azure is free. So again, copying stuff up into Azure is free in backup, and then pulling that backup down, restoring it if you need it, is also free when it comes to transfers. All right. So again, the great thing about Azure Backup, again, is if you want the simple option, you can put an agent on your workstation, configure it to point to Azure, and it's backing up your workstation. So again, this is an example that I use with my included partner credits to back up family machines. Again, I'm not looking to back up the whole machine. I'm just looking to back up important data they may have or applications and run that on a regular basis. Now, when it does backups of files, it will do differentials. All right. So again, the first one will be a bit large, obviously, but after that, we're just looking at differentials around anything that's changed. Now, if you want disaster recovery, so basically you want a hot or cold spare sitting somewhere in the data center, you can use site recovery. So this is based on the site recovery technology that you can do on-prem with Windows, basically using Azure as a destination. So you put machines that are running Hyper-V, the guests that are on there, they can be replicated into Azure, into virtual machines there. You can set up an environment so that if that on-prem environment fails, that the VM running in Azure would again spin up automatically, and the user could potentially see no difference. All right. So the way that you can do that is this hot recovery, right? So hot standby, and you can also use the Azure Site Recovery as a way of doing migration. So you can replicate a machine from on-prem into the cloud and then shut the machine down on-prem, and then use the one in the cloud and use that as a migration strategy. So that is available. Now, site-to-site recovery is also available for things like VMware as well. So if you have VMware machines, that is compatible and can be used in site-to-site recovery. Now, the costing here for site recovery is really cheap. Again, it's backup data. So again, it sits in a backup vault. The backup or the disaster recovery machine you may have in Azure is not costing you anything because it's not spun up, it's just replicating data. Now, if you set it up so it immediately spins up upon failure, then basically what will happen is the moment that that machine starts spinning up, then there'll be a cost involved. But really at that point in time when there's disaster, that's what you basically want to be able to do. But the important thing here is to remember that it's all based around consumption billing, right? So you don't pay for stuff that you're not using. And again, site-to-site recovery is a really great option. So I would certainly encourage you, if you haven't done site-to-site recovery on-prem or in Azure, go and take a look at it. It's dead easy to set up. Basically, you put an agent on your local machine, do some configuration in Azure, and then you replicate the data. So again, really straightforward, really easy technology to give people that peace of mind when it comes to disaster recovery. So when we look at the abilities of where to put data in Azure, we've got, for SMBs, we've got storage, right? So we can just create a big disk, basically a location in Azure that we can just map to a Z drive, and we can copy files up there. Really good for photos, really good for archiving, really good for, I just want to keep data somewhere just in case. So maybe old PSTs, again, old data that people just want to keep. I've got backup of files and folders, which I can put on servers and workstations with an agent. And then I've also got the disaster recovery. So that's basically the full machine replication using Hyper-V technology to do that. So again, if you haven't looked at that, super cool technology, and there are some training available in the Ingram portal there for you as well. Now, obviously, we've got backup, we've got storage. What about the actual layers? What about the infrastructure? So what can we do in Azure? Well, as I've mentioned, you can run up a virtual machine. Okay, you can put those machines in scale sets, availability sets. So if one fails, another one can take its place. You can create disks, so you can create as many disks as you want in Azure and attach them to machines and detach them and move them around if you need. You've got a place called blob storage. Blob storage means that it's basically a location to put files, but accessible typically through a web address. And then you've got SMB files. So SMB files allows you to map the Z drive from any current machine, any current workstation up into the cloud and use it like a normal SMB file share. In the networking sphere, you've got, again, site-to-site VPNs. You've got ExpressRoute to give you that priority connection if you want. You can load balance. You've got DNS. Traffic Manager allows you to route traffic between different regions based on where the user's coming from. And of course, sitting over all of this, we've got our security, our management, which means we've got our logging, we've got our site recovery, and we've got, again, basically System Center in the cloud that we can manage all this. So again, think of all the hardware that you're working with today, a single console that will give you that environment, that advice, and again, you can set up alerts and logs on all of this. Now, the last option that I'll mention here is hosting websites. So again, if you're hosting websites for customers, this is potentially an option. You can run up either a machine in IIS. So if you want to run up an IIS server and have a Windows server that does IIS or whatever one, you can do that. Expensive, but you can do that. A better option is to use the inbuilt PaaS service, platform as a service, that runs dedicated for websites. So again, this abstracts, removes the hardware, allows you to nominate, for example, to run WordPress and connect storage to it and host it outside. You get the global availability, you get the load balancing built in without you having to worry too much about the hardware. So lots of options there for you in the SMB. So what I'll do is I'll just quickly show you the Azure Console if you haven't seen it. So typically when you log into Azure, portal.azure.com, you'll see something like this. Again, this is a typical scenario that I've got, and you'll see that I'm got some credits here, how many days I've got left on those credits. Down the left-hand side, these are resources that are pinned to my environment. You'll see that I have, so the app services, typically websites, platform as a service. I've got virtual machines, I've got storage, I've got my Azure Active Directory. So again, this is where you go in, you'll see your Office 365 users. You can perform password resets and all that because they're using the same thing. If we go into the option here for all services and I begin to scroll down, you potentially will get an idea of the sheer size of services that are available in Azure, right? So again, you may not use all of them, but they are available, they are there. They give you the flexibility, again, for developers, for infrastructure, for all sorts of things in here. So again, there are 600, I think almost 800 now services that are available in Azure, and each one of those represents potentially an opportunity that you can go and speak to a customer about or provide a solution around if you want. You'll notice that I've also got the ability here to create different dashboards. So for example, if I go in and look at this dashboard I've created here, here's my costing dashboard. You'll see that I've broken out the costs. This is giving me the percentage costs for this month. And if I go into an option here, which is monitoring, this dashboard here will show you, again, for example, when it comes up, you'll see here are my DNS queries for that domain here in the last couple of days. All right. So again, it just varies on the domain. And if this will come up, this will show me here, basically, I'm monitoring on-prem environments. So again, I've got an Azure agent set up that's going to give me anti-malware assessment on those machines. It looks at things like which machines need updates, and it will prompt me for that. And you'll see that I also get the change tracking option. So if I click in that, you'll see that now I can drill in to a more detailed overview of the change tracking for the machines that I'm monitoring. So again, look at the concept here of Azure as a data center. I can roll all of this up into a single monitoring dashboard, a security dashboard. So again, you'll see here that I can see that these are the things that need updating. Surface Pro 4 here, again, this will show me the 15 things that have changed on this machine, so the machine I'm using at the moment. Again, what's been changed in that machine. So I did an Office update before we spoke. All right, and again, this gives you a lot of detail, and again, this is the power of Azure. It's able to suck all those logs up for me and produce a nice monitoring dashboard for on-prem and also what's in the cloud in Office 365 and so on. So lots of options there to explore. Again, a really flexible tool. So as I round off my little piece, again, I would suggest we'll give you these links at the end of the session. You'll see that a lot of this is my journey through Azure. So again, some thoughts that I've had that I've written about, how I begin to understand what Azure was, and then I did backup, then I did application backup, then I did a domain controller, and so on and so forth. So again, remember that you've got free credit, start using them in your environment, but potentially look at it as a way to help customers move the infrastructure into Azure. Again, it's not an all or nothing. You can use a site-to-site VPN, which you're probably very familiar with, and then you can give you the flexibility to move more resources as required into Azure. The big takeaway I would suggest for you is to remember that the billing with Azure is around consumption. You are billed for what you need rather than a flat fee per month. So again, that can be used to your advantage, but you've also got to be wary of that because that is a slightly different approach to doing that. So Arun, I think at this point, it's probably a good idea to open up to questions before we dive into your section.
Perfect. Okay, so I see that we've already got some questions coming through. So what I'll do is I'll hand over to Gaurav just to read out the question.
Yep.
And we'll go from there.
Yes, I think the first question that we have got today is from Graham, and he's asking that are we able to access charity, not-for-profit, and government pricing that is discounted against what the customers can access via Microsoft directly? So that's the first question.
So that's really an Ingram question, I would assume. So again, any licensing questions, I would tend to defer to the Ingram experts in the room, but my answer is simply going to be yes.
Yeah. So the Ingram answer to this question would be that definitely this is something that which happens between Microsoft and the end customer directly. So this kind of pricing is not available through the CSP program. But the thing is that once that free credits which are available to the not-for-profit customers, which is $5,000 per annum. So once they actually exhaust that $5,000 credit on Azure, the remaining, if they've got more Azure consumption happening in that particular year beyond $5,000 that is something that they can buy through the Ingram CSP program. Yeah, and to further answer this, I mean, there is a bit of there's a bit of a technical process involved in then switching that tenant from a direct Microsoft Azure tenant into an Ingram tenant, which is something that we can guide you on if you have got an NFP customer which is actually having a consumption of Azure more than $5,000 per annum.
Okay. Do you want to keep going?
Yeah. Okay. And I think we have the similar question from Nikhil, which is being answered now. Okay. The second question is, please share the process of buying reserved instances. So the process of buying reserved instances is through Ingram Micro, and this is actually currently not available through our marketplace. So we actually sell this through our traditional business route. So what we do is that we actually send out to you a manual form, which actually asks you about the details of the VM types and the address of the customer, and for what duration you want these reserved instances, which is 1 year or 3 year, and then we process this in the backend through our system with Microsoft. Yeah, so that's the way it works. But I think we are currently in the process of getting this automated through buying through our Ingram Micro Cloud Marketplace, but that will probably take a few more months to happen, right, Arun?
Correct. So, Nikhil, the process, we do put the two instances together of the storage and the compute. They are consolidated, so therefore you also get the benefit of the lower cost overall for that particular environment. It's just at the moment we do have a manual process on how we actually process the order on the reserved instance. But absolutely, it's live. We have many customers that have already taken advantage of the opportunity, now getting the benefit of that lower price for their customers.
Yeah, and the reason for that process to be manual is that actually we get the pricing from Microsoft on a monthly basis, which is actually being tailor-made in terms of the SKUs that we have for those reserved instances. And it's very difficult for us to actually have that linkage with the Microsoft system directly at this point in time. So there's a bit of a manual correction and a manual updation that we do before we can actually upload those SKUs into our cloud marketplace. So that link and that integration and that sync is currently that we're working on right now, and we should be able to come up with that in a few months.
Okay.
Next question we have by Nick, and he's asking, what does Microsoft mean by transaction?
So basically a transaction in Azure is any access of the disk, right? So read or write.
Okay. Again, I've got a question from Nikhil, second question from Nikhil, and he's asking if we choose SSD and later want to change to HDD, is it possible?
It depends on the virtual machine, but generally not, but it is possible to do it. Again, it's not advisable. Again, that's why have a think about it up front, but I would suggest to you that thinking about it, generally it's easy to go up to an SSD, but not to go back to a mechanical disk. So yes, it is possible, but it's not a straightforward process in all cases.
Okay. I've got the next question from James, and James is asking, with the CSP, can you see a breakdown of pricing like you showed with the DNS? I've tried to look before, but does not show your current cost.
So just give me that again. I don't. What's the question?
With CSP, you can see a breakdown of pricing.
Oh, okay.
Like you showed with DNS. I tried to look before, but it does not show your current cost.
So there are.
This, I think. Oh,
go on.
Rob.
No, okay.
Go ahead, Rob.
No, you go ahead. No, it's a pricing question. You're better off answering.
We had a similar query from a few of other partners as well, where they wanted to see a cost, breakdown by the VMs and by the storage and by the other components of the Azure infrastructure. So that is something that you can see by downloading a report from the marketplace, where it actually gives you details about each and every resource which you have configured within Azure. And I'm sure that you can get a cost breakdown for DNS as well. But that is not something that you will get right from the portal. I mean, you have to download an Excel report, and that Excel report gives you a lot more details for you to have a go and look at. Right?
Yeah.
Okay, going ahead. So,
any more questions?
So I think we have a question from Nick. When you purchase storage, what does Microsoft mean by transaction? I think Robert already answered that.
Yep. Read and write.
So the next question is from Steve. When is the payment made for RIs? Total upfront, 3 years at once, or monthly? So answer for that is that since Microsoft is offering these huge savings on RIs, so all of the payment for the reserved instances is actually made upfront. So you have to pay for the entire 1 year or for a 3-year duration upfront. But in case if that is not something which is commercially feasible with your end customer, then we have got financing and leasing options as a part of the Ingram micro business, and we can help you in structuring those particular deals to again make it per month kind of consumption-based model for your end customers. But when it comes to for us to paying Microsoft, we are going to pay Microsoft upfront for 1 year and for a 3-year period.
Yeah.
Okay, continuing. Next question we have from Joshua, and he's asking, what about people on the West Coast? Obviously, PaaS not such an issue, but IaaS has a serious latency issue for legacy apps. The whole reason customer would go to IaaS versus PaaS. Can Ingram or Microsoft help with this? Will there be IaaS in Perth or another IaaS provider using the similar model?
So one of the answers to that is, again, going to be around using something like ExpressRoute. That's going to give you a priority dedicated link that you would, again, use with Microsoft and your ISP. The other way is also to look at, again, setting up the infrastructure in a way that makes sense to, again, have that acceleration, to have, local points of local caching, which is possible with CDN networks. But at the end of the day, if it lives in the cloud, it's going to be constrained by the bandwidth and the connectivity, and that's something that you need to take into consideration when you're building these sort of solutions. So at this stage, my understanding from Microsoft is there's no plans to put a data center in Western Australia at the moment. Again, there are only four data centers in Australia at this point in time. They are based on the East Coast, and that is, again, typically around the population environment. So you can minimize it, but again, unfortunately, yeah, the tyrannies of distance mean that there will potentially be some latencies for people over in the West.
Okay. The next question I have is from Lee, and he's asking that I think should or can a third-party backup be added to an Azure VM?
So the Azure VM includes backups, obviously snapshots, all of that stuff is built into Azure Site Recovery with built into Azure things like Site Recovery as well. But if you want to, yes, you can add a third-party backup. There are backups third-party available like Acronis, Veeam. They're available in the marketplace. You can tag those on. There's going to be additional cost to do that. On top of that, configuration and whatnot. So again, you're going to need any backups from parties who do understand and can work with Azure. And there are already some in there. Veeam is an example, like I said, Acronis is another. So again, you can do that. If you want to use something like you do on IaaS between virtual machines, then once the virtual machines are running, they're like on-prem infrastructure. You can use your own backups to do that. But the recommendation is to use the products that are provided in Azure or the third parties from the marketplace.
Now, I'm just mindful we're getting close to time, and I do have to just quickly go through the Azure Accelerate program. Yeah. So what we'll do in this instance is I'll just quickly go through my slides. I'll do a very cut down version. And if there are further questions, then perhaps Gaurav and John or myself can go back to those individuals with answers to those.
Yeah, we've got 3 more questions left, so I think we can take them later after your session. Yep.
Okay, so I'll just quickly go through the Azure Accelerate. So really, those of you that aren't familiar with the Azure Accelerate program, this is a global initiative driven by Ingram Micro, and it's really a complete program around the entire IaaS lifecycle to basically help you to go and win more projects around Azure and help you obviously to build a structure on how that all works. Next slide, please, Rob. Okay, so as I mentioned every step of the way, so we're very comprehensive around helping you around customer demand generation. We can help you with things like kits to help you go and offer Azure offerings to your clients, and we've got quite a structure around that. Complete lifecycle services, preferential pricing we've touched on. We can help you around building up your skills and competencies around those particular projects. And we also offer you elite partner treatment. I'll go into that in a bit more detail. Next slide, please, Rob. So we've basically broken down the way that we look after our partners that have decided to join the Azure Accelerate program into 3 fundamental buckets. That is fundamentals, develop, and elite. So fundamentals we've actually categorized into 2 areas, and the 0 to 5,000 is a monthly spend on Azure consumption. And you'll see the second category there is between 5 and 10. These are US dollars. Within that, in that area, you'll get access to things like the Azure campaign kits. If you move up through the tiers into the next tier being develop and then elite, you get access to additional assets for things like Journey to the Cloud, which are playbooks. We give you access into case studies to help you to build case studies with your clients. Access into our lifecycle services, so we can help you around assessments, discovery, architecture and design, proof of concept, and also around migration services as well. Each of those have discounted rates as part of that service, but these services that we can help complement you when you're going to sell those projects to your clients. We're also offering exclusive promotions, which I won't go into too much detail now with the time I've got. Also, when you move into the next tier being sort of the develop and elite area, we're offering additional discounts around the pricing that we give to you. So your standard margin you get with Ingram on Azure is typically 10%. There are exceptions to that as well. Basically, if you get to perhaps the develop and elite areas, there's additional discounts that apply to that by basically being as parts of the program. We also offer you around skills. We also encourage you to build those skills, and we're giving credits towards certification, again, depending on whether you're in the fundamentals or elite category. You also have access to the sales team. You've heard from Gaurav today, and we're also offering customers a trip over to our annual Cloud Summit event, which is in March. We have a number of winners which are going over there as part of winners of the Azure Accelerator program that launched last year, and they're going to be over in San Diego next month with us to meet with our global teams and obviously get the value of being obviously very focused around Azure. Next slide, please, Rob. So I won't go into too much detail about the discovery assessment, etc. here, based on the time, but I'm sure any of the Ingram team would be very happy to go through that in more detail, how that team works, how we help you around leveraging those resources, and how those pricing models specifically work. Next slide. So just in rounding off, I wouldn't do justice without talking about our next series of Cloud Elevate workshops running in Sydney and Melbourne next month. So Melbourne, we're running, it's a full-day workshop. Again, it's with Rob, so you'll have a chance to spend more time with him, perhaps Melbourne and Sydney next month. Melbourne's running on the 12th of March and Sydney is on the 13th. I've included their details of the session. If you haven't seen that in any of our communications or any EDMs, feel free to contact the sales team if you don't know how to register for those, and we look forward to hopefully seeing you there. Next slide, please. And lastly, the Azure Accelerate incentive we're running to the 30th of June. So we're upping up to a $2,000 incentive based on a minimum of 300 spend on Azure per month, which needs to be continuous. And we're offering $1,000 if you continue that service for the first month, and that extends up to $2,000 if that service then continues. The details I have included there on the slide, but if you need more detail about the specifics of that, again, contact any of the Cloud sales team to get across that detail. Final slide, please, Rob. If you don't know how to contact us, if you're new to Ingram Micro, I've included there the email address to the Cloud sales team. We're quite an extensive team now. There are over 12 people now within the Cloud sales team. That's the general line as well. It's a Sydney-based number, 029381 6735. Again, and the email address there is also for the group inbox. Any of the team there would be pleased to help you around any questions you've got around Azure or any of the other services that we currently have on the Ingram Cloud Marketplace. Top of the hour, I think I've used my time. Thank you for everyone that's joined this morning. Some really, really great questions. Thank you for all of those that did send those through. We'll get back to all the individuals that sent through questions in case you've got some more. And look forward to talking to you again soon. And don't forget the event that we're running in Melbourne and Sydney next month. Please feel free to register for that. Thank you once again, and good morning.
Thank you. I've got 3 more questions left, which probably we'll take offline and reach out to those people. Yeah. Thank you.